Welcome back to our parent video series. In this episode, it will feature a panel discussion with our amazing kindergarten through ninth grade school counselors, Mrs. Jill Johnson, Mrs. Gigi Kean, and Mr. Chris Gaspar. Together, they bring a wealth of knowledge, care, and strategies to support your children, both academically, socially, and emotionally. Today, we'll be talking about how parents can best support their children at home through different stages of development. Before we get started, I want to give them all a chance to introduce themselves. So, Mrs. Jill Johnson, if you could please introduce yourself.
Yeah. I was born and raised in Iowa. I moved to Minnesota to do my undergrad. I taught there for 2 years and then moved to South Carolina. Taught there for 1 and then realized that I really like the relationship part of teaching, but not really the teaching part of teaching. And I was talking to my school counselor at the school and she was like, that sounds like my job. And I was like, amazing. So then I got my master's in school counseling, and my first job out of my master's program was actually here at A.D. Henderson. Just such a blessing. So I've been here for 4 years now.
And we're so happy to have you. Mrs. Gigi Kean?
Hi, everybody. Okay, so I think that my journey to becoming a school counselor has been a long time coming. I've been in education for over 20 years. And I feel like ever since I can remember, education was a calling for me. I am one of those like stereotypical stories where you played with your stuffed animals as if they were students. You played school. I was always somebody's tutor all throughout school. And I really enjoyed all throughout the various jobs that I've had in education. I've really enjoyed the building one-on-one relationships with students and guiding them through various phases of their lives. Most of my experience comes from high school, but I've been here for 4 years as well, and I'm really enjoying it. I love my job. I love driving to work. I have long commute, but I love driving to and from work because I really feel like we get to make a difference in our students' lives here.
Absolutely. And Mr. Chris Gaspar?
Thank you. Good morning. So I am born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, with a large family of 8 siblings. So I grew up with many different personalities to deal with, and it became kind of fun to navigate that. And I had a lot of nieces and nephews at a young age, so I was always working with kids, taking care of kids, being a camp counselor and all that great, wonderful stuff. I really liked working with kids and thought, oh, this is definitely something I could pursue as a career. And so I ended up going into the classroom as a teacher assistant for students with emotional disabilities while working on my master's degree in school counseling. My undergrad was in psychology, but I digress real quick. And then fast forward to school counseling. And then I ended up living in Arizona, Southern California, and now sunny South Florida, all being a school counselor, both at the elementary level and the high school level. And what I love about being here at A.D. Henderson and FAU High School is now my career's kind of gone full circle to be able to now get from the kindergarten now to the college, being a fully dual enrollment high school. So it's been really a pleasure to be here for the last 3 years now.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. And we're so incredibly grateful to have your expertise at A.D. Henderson and FAU High School. And so I want to ask a few questions. I'm going to start with you, Mrs. Johnson. At the elementary level, there's obviously different concerns as a counselor that you deal with. So what are the most common social emotional challenges that students face at the elementary level?
We see in my office, I see a lot of issues with anxiety. Perfectionism is a really big one, especially with the rigor here at A.D. Henderson. It does kind of make a lot of kids feel like they really want to perform. So practicing different coping skills. I also see sometimes, which is developmental, but struggling with perspective taking and empathy, and then building and maintaining healthy friendships while also building and maintaining healthy boundaries is a really hard time for our kids in elementary school to kind of fully understand.
And it makes sense. There's so much that they still have to learn and understand, and we teach the academics. And sometimes I think we forget that we have to teach those skills also to students and parents at home too, knowing that those are, that's normal. It's normal for students at that age to experience those things, and that we're working on it with them here, and they can also do that at home. So how can parents help children build those healthy routines and help them with some of those concerns that you say you see in our youngest learners?
Yeah. So like you were saying, we teach the academics here at school, but sometimes we forget that we also need to teach to the social emotional learning as well. And I always tell parents that children are really great observers. They're horrible interpreters. And so sometimes skills that we had to be taught, we forget that we had to be taught those things. And so kind of like what we talked about in my parent workshop, which shout out to the parent workshops, highly recommend to attend, but about investing in the future child. So noticing those things that you find that your children is getting kind of stuck on, and then doing what you could even call them little boot camps, practicing those different skills of empathy, perspective taking, building a positive friendship, and then explaining in your own life, like modeling in your own life, but verbalizing when you are practicing healthy boundaries, when you are practicing really healthy friendships, when you are showing empathy or perspective taking. Children sometimes just need to be explicitly told how to be a good person. And we're doing that here at AD Henderson, but sometimes they need some help.
I totally agree. And I think that the students learn so much from hearing the thoughts of adults. And if we keep all of that to ourselves, we're really doing a disservice to kids when we are practicing those things. If we model it, then they're going to be more likely to pick up on them as well. I know a lot of parents reach out to us at the elementary level about anxiety, whether it's test anxiety or just generalized anxiety, and they really struggle to figure out how to help their children through those anxious moments. How would you help parents guide their child through that and help set them up for success, even arriving to school each day?
Yeah. So we talk about how anxiety is kind of like a smoke detector. I want my smoke detector to go off when there's a fire in the house. I don't want my smoke detector to go off every time I microwave popcorn. That's really annoying. So same thing. We have some kids whose smoke detectors are working really great. And then we have some kids who smoke detectors are going off at every little step of the way. And so how to best calm them down. Whenever a child is in fight, flight, or freeze, it doesn't literally mean that they're fighting something, running away, or freezing. It could mean that they're lashing out with their words. It could mean that they're procrastinating or disassociating from something. So if you're noticing that your child is doing some of those things, what I always recommend is to get them calm first before you bring up what is upsetting them. As we know with our brain, that if you are in fight, flight, or freeze, you lose the ability to form perspectives, show empathy, and even take care of yourself. So our students, especially our younger students, don't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex, and so they need help showing those skills of how to regulate their emotions first. And then that's when you can say, hey, I noticed that you had this big feeling. Let's calm you down first. And then let's talk about what caused that big feeling. If you try to do it during the big feeling, honestly, it's going to go in one ear, not the other, and it might even upset them even more. So I think those are really great things. I think it's also important to realize, and for students to realize, that a little bit of anxiety is actually okay. I know that in our culture now, we talk about anxiety as this big bad wolf, this big bad word, but a little bit is actually helpful, right? Before my job interview here, I was super nervous, but because I have healthy regulation, I, after the job interview, calmed myself down and then was able to move on. Anxiety becomes an issue when even after the job interview, I can't move on from that anxiety, that anxious state.
I think that's a really good point to make too. There is a healthy level of anxiety. Sometimes it's a motivator too, and really shows that you care.
Yes.
To get a little, if a student gets a little anxiety before a test, it means they really care. They want to do well. They want to succeed. Like you said, though, if it goes beyond that test and they just can't get past it, then that's something that needs to be worked on. But I think bringing up that point of waiting for the child to be calm before you deal with it. It's hard for us adults to wait because we just want to fix the problem. But at the end of the day, we could be making it worse. So I think that's a really great point to bring up. So thank you for your expertise. I appreciate that. Mrs. Kean, so I want to talk to you. Obviously, you work with the middle schoolers, which is a totally different ball game than elementary schoolers. And even though like 5th and 6th grade is only 1 year apart, there's such different concerns that come up in middle school. So with middle school being such a time for change and growth, what are some of like the biggest concerns that middle school students face? And do you have any tips or tricks for parents to help with that as well?
So I think that the obvious one is the onset of puberty, adolescence. It's hard. And I think that even though we've all been through it, it's very difficult for parents to remember when they went through it. So there's a book called Finding the Magic in Middle School that my teen read. And that book really stresses the point of like putting the parent back in the shoes of, not in the shoes of their child because they can't do that, but to remember what it was like for them when they were 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And then to realize that our students today are dealing with things that we didn't have to deal with. And I know we're going to talk about technology a little bit later on, but that is the biggest one. That's the biggest divider between can I developmentally connect to what my child is going through? Yes. And we need to do that because we often forget what we were like at 12 or 13. Like we didn't know it all and we made mistakes and they were okay. Like we turned out okay. But at the same time to realize that it's not exactly the same because they're definitely having to deal with things that their parents and those of us who are older than their parents did not have to deal with when they were growing up. So the onset of puberty is definitely one. And then I would say the second one is the separation between family unit and individual starts really becoming apparent in middle school. They really start kind of like the book Finding the Magic in Middle School says, trying on different identities, trying on different hats. Like, who am I outside of my parents? Who am I outside of my nuclear family? And sometimes that goes well. Sometimes that's well received. And sometimes we have to like rein the children back in because it's like, hey, I understand that this is part of what you're going through, but at the same time, like, let's talk about our family values and what's important to us as a family unit and make sure that our behavior and our decisions are in alignment with those things.
Right. And despite hormones and everything else going on, social media, making sure that that individual identity of the child still positively represents their family values is sometimes really hard for students to connect to. And I know personally, when I think back to middle school, and I'm sure a lot of parents are going to be able to relate, it tends to be some of the most difficult years of growing up. And that was before social media. And now you have a totally different layer added to it. And so it's no wonder it's such a challenging time for children because they are trying to grow up, but they're trying to grow up in a world where everything is being documented and they're comparing themselves to others. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that. I know one of the things in middle school too that parents try to balance is how they can give their children independence, but still provide that guidance for them academically, even with their organization. So not being that helicopter parent, but also providing the support and the balance of stepping away a little bit too. Do you have any tips about that?
I do actually. And I think that the best way for parents to relate to what I'm trying to suggest is think back to when they were learning to walk. Like you celebrated their first steps, you celebrated the most steps that they took, and you were very happy that they had reached that milestone. And that really is the beginning of independence. But sometimes you have to walk side by side with them. Sometimes you have to hold their hand as they're walking. And sometimes you outright just have to like pick them up off the floor and not let them walk and carry them. So I would say that the same philosophy, the same way of thinking applies to that gradual release that I think I would like to see from parents of kids in middle school is that to celebrate and like acknowledge the moments when they are trying to become individuals, even if that means that like your ego is a little hurt because it's like, oh, they don't need me, or like, oh, they have an opinion that's different from mine, which is highly possible. But at the same time, like I said, sometimes you do have to hold them by the hand, or sometimes you just have to not let them walk. Sometimes it's like, hey, I don't think that you're ready for this. And I would say middle school is not the time to let go. Like I still would like to see some of the hand-holding that we see in elementary school bleed onto middle school, because especially 6th and 7th grade, they are so key to establishing a good academic platform for where they're going to go to high school, what kind of high school they're going to get into, and what they are going to do academically. That emotionally, when they're in middle school, it's really not the time to just like, okay, well, they made it through 5th grade, and then like now it's time for them to, right? Now it's time for me to. It's actually a huge time of change. It's the first time they have 8 teachers with 8 different sets of expectations, 8 different ways of doing things, and they themselves are trying to figure out how to live in their own bodies day to day, because they really don't understand why they're feeling what they're feeling, or why their bodies are doing what they're doing. And I just think that that's a good way for parents to try to understand.
Yeah, it's a really good analogy too, because I think kids believe in middle school that they don't need their parents' support. Mom, Dad, I don't need you to check my homework. I have it all done. My planner's filled out, all of that. But there still has to be the checks and balances, like checking in on your child. It doesn't mean you have to micromanage them, but providing the support so they know you still are part of their academic career and part of their social emotional growth, because otherwise they can get in some trouble trying to navigate this difficult time of life without parental support. So I think that's a really great point. What advice do you have for parents to support children's resiliency, especially in their decision making and interpersonal relationships? What do you suggest?
So I think that one of the things that we as a society tend to overlook is the learning opportunities that come from making mistakes. I think that we as adults, caring, loving adults in their lives, we want everything to go perfectly, so much so that we prevent them from failing. And I think that failing is key to developing that resilience. If they don't learn to fall, then they won't learn to bounce back, which is the definition of resilience. It's like our ability to bounce back after facing adversity or facing an obstacle or failing at something. So the same applies with academics. Focus on the process. So for example, let's say your child takes a test and they get a grade that they're not happy with, that they feel is like not the best that they could have done or whatever. Or perhaps it's you who feels that way. Mm-hmm. I think if you focus on the process of like, okay, how did you prepare for the test, instead of just on the outcome, I think that also helps. Mm-hmm. I also think that as adults, we need to be more mindful of what we praise in children. So like, instead of focusing on their natural ability, like, oh my God, you're so smart, focus on a character trait or a personality trait. Like, you're such a hard worker. Like, when you start something, you don't give up, and like until you see it, all the way through. And I think that those affirmations, those praises, they really go a long way. And children are aware of them, even if you're not doing it directly to them, even if it's something that you like post on social media. They know like what's going on the fridge, what my mom posted about on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And those things drive a message home to them.
I agree with that. And I think too, we all remember the first time we did poorly, let's say on a test, and that first C or D or whatever it is that you were disappointed and upset, but that mistake really sometimes drives you to do better next time. And that self-reflection of, okay, you didn't want to get a C, you got a C. What did you do to prepare? What can you do next time so you get a B? That process, I think, is really important, because looking at it as a failure and getting punished for a poor grade doesn't necessarily carry that long-term reflection and change of behavior. And so I think that's a really great point. So I'm going to shift to you, Mr. Gaspar. So you work with a very different population of students at FAU High School than Mrs. Johnson and Ms. Kean do in the K-8. They're highly intelligent. really self-motivated in a lot of ways. But with that can come a lot of, I know, perfectionist qualities. And not only that, but ninth grade is a huge transition. You're going from middle school to high school. You know, it's a challenging, rigorous program. What are some of the challenges that our ninth graders tend to face here at FAU High School that you've noticed?
I think one of the biggest challenges right off the bat is learning how to manage your time wisely, right? There's a lot of different aspects that go into a high schooler's life, especially ninth grade. You know, they're just transitioning from middle school, still bleeding out some of those, adolescent and puberty-like behaviors, right? Because they're now in kind of different phases of their development in ninth grade. So learning how to navigate the social circles while managing their academic rigor, right? Which is a little bit leveled up here at FAU High School compared to traditional high schools and compared to some of their friends that they have at other schools, right? So they're learning how to navigate all that at the same time, and it could be quite a challenge. So these days with technology, like we've talked about, there's a lot of extra distractions as well, and that fear of missing out, or FOMO, right? So they're trying to get all their homework done, manage their family responsibilities, manage their extracurriculars and their social circles. So it's kind of all of that in one, but the bottom line is really, how do I manage my time between all of those things?
Right. So how would you, give parents advice? Their child's now in ninth grade. They have significant academic expectations on them. But we also know that the mental health of children, especially at the middle school and high school level, is sometimes challenging and sometimes can prevent you from doing well academically. So how can parents help balance that academic rigor and protecting their child's mental health at the same time?
Absolutely, yeah. It can be twofold, right? Sometimes it's the parent having direct conversation with their kid, right? Just that checking in. And it's really important for parents to remember to be really intentional with your words at this state in the game, right? Again, if we remember back to when we were that age, I didn't want to hear things from my parents, but I'd take it from another adult, no problem, right? So we have to be really intentional with the words that we're using in our tone, right? It's kind of like walking on eggshells sometimes with those teenagers. But when we do that and check in and ask questions that aren't like a yes, no, or a good, bad, right? Those open-ended questions like, how was homecoming? Good. I would ask, what was homecoming like? It invites more of a conversation, right? So things like that. So again, being very intentional with your words. The other thing is also you can reach out to me, right? Sometimes if the kids aren't receiving quite what the parents want them to, they can reach out to me or another adult at school. I'm happy to do that. Parents reach out all the time. Kids don't even realize that they've reached out. And then I can kind of work my counseling magic behind the scenes and help that way. So, definitely a twofold approach if you needed.
And I think that's a great point for all parents to understand that if they are struggling with something with their child at home, of course, we aren't coming home with you and we can't help you in-house. But if you reach out, you all are a wealth of knowledge and support that can help them tackle some of those challenges that maybe they see at home and we don't see at school, and vice versa. And so that conversation, that open conversation, can really help us best support the child as much as possible. So one other question for you, Mr. Gaspar. So obviously if students get into FAU High School, we know that academically they have that intelligence to have gotten in, right? They need test scores and interviews and all of those things. But sometimes we have students who, as intelligent as they are, really struggle with study habits and independence. And even though they're so bright, it doesn't always show because they're still struggling with some of those other skills. What are some things that parents can do at home to set their child up for success with those study habits or with those organizational skills that maybe, I know we do here, but how do we then take it home?
Yeah, I would say one of the things they can do is help them manage those distractions that they have, right? Come up with a schedule. You've got to write things down. Some of the high schoolers have a problem with understanding that fully, or it's on Canvas.
Well, they do at elementary and middle school too. They don't want to write it down. They think they have it all here, and then they forget by the time they get home.
And by the time you get to a rigorous program like we have at FAU High School, you can't possibly keep it all up there, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got to get them in the habit of writing things down, right? Like my mom would keep track on the calendar, like when do you have music lessons, when do you have this, when do you have that, when's this sport, that activity. Have them start doing it now, right? Have the kids start writing down all their activities and plugging things in on a calendar. It's good to be able to visualize it. Then it's more realistic then, right? So very important to write things down and keep track of everything on a calendar. I think another thing they can do is help them manage those distractions, right? Like if you want to check in your phone with me for an hour because you have an assignment that does not need technology, like I've got to read chapters of my book right now, go ahead, take the phone over here, put it down, put it away. Or if you are doing certain tasks and you're worried about daydreaming or going on social media, set the timers on your phone. If you're going to have your phone in your presence, I always tell the kids, set a timer for 20 minutes. And when that goes off, reflect to yourself for a second. What did I just do in that last 20 minutes? Was I productive or was I not?
And use it as a tool.
Use it as a tool, right? Further, I also have some students working on a Google Sheet. Their time logs that they share with me. So I can see exactly, like I can tell you all these things, but I don't really know what you're doing, right? So it's that two-way communication tool that we have. So, I can see how many hours you worked on this specific subject. And then did you daydream? Did you play with your dog? What were you doing during that other time where you were trying to read and get some of those other assignments done, right? And then we can kind of tweak it from there. But we have to see things on paper to figure out where are we at and where do we need to go.
Absolutely. And I think what you just mentioned is a perfect segue because we've all mentioned in some capacity how technology has affected children, not only their academics in a positive way, right? They have access to more to help support their academics, but they also have access to more things that maybe they aren't developmentally ready for yet. So knowing that technology is such a big part of, all these children's lives, I want to touch with each of you. What would be one piece of advice at your level that you would give parents regarding technology? So at the elementary level, how would you advise parents? What is something that you feel like would really be a game changer for technology as far as being a supportive tool versus a distraction or something negative?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to remember that the internet and online is a public space. Just like a public park, anybody and everybody can show up there. And so sometimes things might look like they're for kids, but they're actually not. YouTube Kids or Roblox, for example, are things that anybody and everybody can make videos or put a game on there. And if you're not really observing, you realize that your child is looking at something that is not appropriate for them to see. So I understand privacy, but I think for the younger kids, you need to have a really firm grip on what they're looking at, what apps they're playing. And I think in elementary, a personal safety standard is that they should not be talking to anybody that they've never met in person. Roblox, for example, has opportunity for you to talk to people, like in chat rooms or things like that. And I just think at their age, they're developmentally not aware of what to share and what not to share. And what email they're doing it from or, anything like that. So we just have to be extra safe in those areas.
Yeah, and that's a great point because we're talking about five-year-olds to 10, 11-year-olds. And so these are the years where the foundational understanding of technology is really implemented. And if boundaries aren't set at this age, then when they get to middle and high school, it's really hard to reel it back. So I think that's a great point. Parents need to know what their kids are doing and having access to, whether it's like time limits even on things or just like a background monitoring. I think you can't give a student free rein on that, especially at that age, but those healthy boundaries is really important too. Ms. Kean, what about you at the middle school level? What would you say?
If I had to reduce it down to like one thing, I would say I think it would be a great idea for middle school families to create technology agreements with their students. Kids really like to have a word or a say in what's happening in their lives. And I think that coming up with an agreement is the perfect balance because both parties have to agree to what goes on that agreement. And it mimics the process that I sometimes go through when kids are having a difficult time with friendship here, which is we put it down on paper, like what are our last agreements on, and we sign our name. And even though it may sound a little bit like superficial or a little bit like forced, I really do think that it is important, because if without that agreement, without that, hey, these are my expectations, what are you willing to work with? And then like knowing that you can revisit that agreement and like you can amend it. I think that kids really don't learn those boundaries, like you were saying, and then we see kids get in trouble.
They want that independence. They think they are old enough to have that independence, but then they don't know what to do when they've gone too far with technology and how to reel that back. So I think that's a great point with the agreement. Decide what are our non-negotiables. You as a child in this household with a, let's say, phone, and us as your parents, these are the things that we are agreeing to, and this is why. I think that the reason why is really important too, because especially middle schoolers, it's like, well, why? So if in that agreement there is the why behind it, I think it'll be helpful too. What about you, Mr. Gaspar, at the high school level?
I would say the most helpful thing for parents to be doing is having more of a balance in conversation rather than control, right? Because we're so big on starting to foster that independence with students and have them literally over on a university campus, right? For most of their day. They're going to need technology. They're going to utilize social media platforms. It's become increasingly more popular, right? The school uses it. We have social media accounts here. It's not going away. So it's best to learn how to have those conversations about appropriate use, what is important to focus on and what's not so important to focus on, right? Having tech-free meal times, for example, would be awesome, right? In just setting that example. Parents have to do the same thing, though. If you're telling your kid to do one thing and you're not doing it, forget about it having any validity with them, right? We have to model where we want them to see. So if we're constantly work, can we put that down for 20 minutes? Can we put our phone down, put our computer down, and just be present with the people we're with, say at a family meal time as an example, right?
That's a great point. And I think that when you have that time where the phones are down, the technology is away, and you have that family time, then you have that opportunity to check in with your child and have those open lines of communication without distraction. We know that there's going to be distractions. Sometimes we all are distracted sometimes too, even when we're in a meeting and a phone dings, we have to check really quick to make sure everyone's okay. But it takes time away from what's really important. And I think that's a great point. So very last question before we wrap it up, what would be one easy, quick parent tip for just doing quick check-ins on their child's well-being? So at the elementary level, what's something quick and easy parents can do to just check in and make sure their child's okay, really?
Yeah. We have a feelings thermometer in my office, which is just an easy thing for kids to even point to of how they're feeling. On a scale of 1 to 10, you could, or a smiley face, you could have them point and explain why. Part of my lessons are actually going to be going through different feelings and what that looks like and how that feels like. So those are always really great conversations to have with them as well.
That's awesome. And I think too, at the elementary level, they learn so much about character traits and how characters feel, and then they can't actually relate it back to themselves. So I think that that's a good point too, to bring up even within the academics. Like, you're talking about a certain character. How do you relate? How do you not relate? And use the feelings to help see where your child's at. What about you, Ms. Kean?
I would say for middle school, it's very important for us to pay attention to their nonverbal communication, not so much to what they're saying, like, how are you feeling, or are you okay? We have to be more observant and watch things like, has their sleep pattern changed? Has something changed in the way they're taking care of their body, like their personal hygiene? How do they look when they're around, the family, and when they're home? Do they look tired? Are they irritable? I think that carries more weight in pre-adolescents and adolescents than actually asking them, because sometimes they may not understand how they actually feel, or they're already playing like a game of chess. Like, if I say this, then my mom or dad are going to do this or think this. So then they hold back from saying those things. So I think that paying attention to their nonverbal communication, nonverbal cues is really key.
I think that's even a great point for 4th and 5th grade. Kindergarten through 3rd graders, they just tell you how they feel. But really a change in behavior and those nonverbal cues is what we start to see in 4th grade and up as maybe a change in well-being. So I think that's a really great point also for the upper elementary grades. What about you, Mr. Gaspar?
So I was going to kind of shift more back to having that conversation now that the kids are a little bit older. They can tend to be a little bit more talkative. Of course, you're going to have that balance of the ones that don't. And so picking up on those nonverbal cues is still going to be super important for some of those kids. But otherwise, I would say having a daily or weekly check-in, right? Something that feels more natural, not forced, right? So how do we make that happen? Ask open-ended questions, like I said before, right? To kind of spur the conversation. Important, listen more than you talk, right? We always want to do that talking. We want to fix. We want to make things better. We want to help, right? That empathetic bone in us wants to make things better, right? But sometimes we just need to listen and let them tell you how they feel. And sometimes just them doing that makes them feel better without you needing to do anything, right? So, and then importantly, stay consistent. If you start doing that, keep doing that.
That's such great advice across the board. I want to thank the 3 of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules this morning to record this video. I know parents are going to get so much out of it, and I really think it's important for them to understand, what the role of a school counselor is, the expertise that you have in so many different areas, and the knowledge base that you have to really support their children here. Some of these kids come at 5 years old and they don't leave until they're 17 or 18. And so, having a team like you all here, I feel incredibly grateful to have you here. And I know the parents are going to feel exactly the same way, especially if they haven't interacted with you much and get to watch this video. And to our parents, thank you so much for joining us for today's video series. In addition to this video, we also have launched kindergarten through 8th grade quarterly workshops with Mrs. Kean and Mrs. Johnson that we hope that you are able to participate in. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And until then, thank you so much for being such an important part of the A.D. Henderson and FAU High School family.